Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well today. Good morning, and welcome to Section 2 of Electronic Literature, a course at the University of Mary Washington. And I hope you can't hear too much of the screaming going on in my backyard, but there's an argument happening about whose turn it is on the trampoline. And so you may hear little snatches of that, but I assure you everyone is fine. They are just impatient with each other. So that's been a trend today between those two. So hopefully they'll figure that out. But anyway, today is, as you see, the 29th of March, and we were talking about the third generation of electronic literature. I say we, but really it's me. I'm talking about the third generation of electronic literature. You've either read or watched a set of ideas about that by Leo Flores. I'm going to go over some of those things and talk about them. Kind of putting them in my own words and in the context of where we are in the class and a particular assignment that I have for you using the third generation as the key question. So I'm going to be talking a bit about these things. I've got the bird cam going. I have not seen any birds there today or yesterday or the day before. Really, it's been a while. I don't know if it's just time of day. I have not been here the normal times of day, or maybe they moved on. I don't know. Like the Juncos that used to always be here, maybe they migrate. I don't know. I guess I could check. I have that bird app. There's I don't know if you know bird stuff, but there's an app called Merlin where you can learn a lot about birds, like what different species are and stuff. Let me just check my Merlin real quick while I'm letting people get online. Yeah, don't forget to say hello on chat, either on Discord or Twitch, whichever place you're watching. I'll see both of those. Yeah, got the music started. Just checking my music has stopped. But yeah, it's always good to see who's out there. So I see I have 18 viewers, which is about right. But otherwise, it's great to see who's specifically out there. Let's see, Junko. Yeah, okay, so they're supposed to be, looks like they do migrate, but they migrate away during the winter, maybe? And then they come back the rest of the year? I don't know. Maybe they don't migrate. I don't know. I can't really tell. So this is not a class about birds. But it might as well be, right? Well, I'm going to be talking about Twitter today, so there's a connection. So third generation of eLit, that's what we're doing. And oops, I didn't mean to do that. What did I just do? Oh, okay. So here we are. I just clicked on something in OBS. So some reminders and an update. So this week is week 10. So it's a week where I will see the even cohorts in person on Wednesday, HCC 329, not 327, HCC 329, and odd cohorts will be online on Zoom. On Wednesday, we'll be talking about Black Mirror, an episode of Black Mirror called Bandersnatch. It is available on Netflix, and I'm asking you to take a look at that. I have checked before, like whenever I've assigned something in Netflix, and I don't usually hear anyone having access issues with Netflix, but if you do have an access issue, like if you don't already subscribe to Netflix, don't know how to get it or whatever, let me know. It is not free, but you can sign up for a free trial, and that will work fine. Also, it used to be the case that Bandersnatch did not work in the web browser version of Netflix, but it does now, or at least it worked for me last night on my Mac using the interactive part. So what you'll see, this is an interactive episode of Black Mirror. Black Mirror is a pretty dark TV series, I guess, kind of like Twilight Zone, but I guess everything's about social media basically. And the idea is, for this one, it's structured like an interactive fiction, and it is an example of interactive fiction. It was originally written, the episode was originally authored in the script was written in Twine, but then it was shot, and filmed, and then you can interact with it on Netflix just by clicking different options. You can use your remote if you're watching it on a TV, or you just click on a link if you're watching it in a browser, and you make different choices. And sometimes your choices will be significant, sometimes they won't. And just like any other kind of interactive fiction that we've looked at. So please check it out. The other thing also to look at, I don't have it linked here, but if you look at the schedule, there's also this blog post by Emily Short I would like you to look at as well. Emily Short, as you hopefully recall, is the author of Galatea, but she also had this interesting response to and critique of Bandersnatch. Emily Short is prolific in the interactive fiction community, both as a writer of interactive fiction, but also a person who writes about interactive fiction. And so she'll do a lot, like whenever each year's interactive fiction competition, she'll always kind of write reviews of the works that she plays and likes, and really kind of doing a lot to help new people join the community and help tell people about it. And so really this is a good write-up about Bandersnatch, not just because it has her thoughts on it, but because she links to and references other people's thoughts on Bandersnatch, so you can really get a sense of its reception within an interactive fiction context. Bandersnatch being on Netflix means that it's fairly popular and mainstream, essentially, as an example of a third generation work of electronic literature, which I'm going to be talking about now in today's lecture. Yeah, they have not resolved their issue yet, but it just seems that oh man, she's like, my 6-year-old is the one who's making the most noise, and she's pounding on a picnic table and about to flip it over. So she's pretty mad. She has a real problem with patience. She's not a patient person and does not like to be told that she needs to wait. So she's struggling through that right now. Anyway, she'll be fine. Today, so the other reminder. Sorry, there's too many tabs. The other reminder is, or update, I guess, is that I have a new assignment for you. This is a project. This is the third generation project, and it is due on Wednesday, April 14th. And so I wanted to say a little bit about it, and I think you'll get to know a bit more about it. Oh yeah, thanks, Bobby. That's the one. Yeah, it's hard to link directly to an episode. I don't know if this link actually even works. I should try, I suppose. Oh, it did. Okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes you can and sometimes you can't because they don't use conventional URLs. You can see it uses these weird tokens. That link seems to work, but also, that's what it looks like. Or this, like there's different versions of it, I suppose. But it is, so Black Mirror is the series, and this is a particular, I guess, one of it. So it says it's an hour and a half long, but it's probably more than that, depending on your choices, I suppose. And like a lot of interactive fictions, you can redo things, or you might want to start over again and try different choices and see what difference it makes. Really just try to do whatever you can. And really, you should probably, by the way, watch, play, whatever the verb is, Bandersnatch before you read Emily Short's response to it, just because there's going to be some spoilers. That said, you might not encounter certain things that she talks about, and so I don't know if it's right to call it a spoiler, but I do think you should try it on your own first so you know what she's talking about. Okay, so the third generation project, let's take a look at it here. This is the assignment description. Like most of my assignments, it's fairly open-ended, but there is a structure or a purpose to this that I hope I can clarify here, and if you have further questions, feel free to ask either now or later. But the idea is to use a third gen genre to make something about a first or second gen work. And so the kind of thing you make and what you say about that first generation work or second generation work, really up to you. But I've got some examples here that'll hopefully help get your wheels turning a little bit. So it's going to be something in a third generation platform or genre. And I've got a list of examples down here, but there are many more, and we can talk about some more. And then you're using it with whichever transitive verb makes the most sense for you. Remix, homage, critique, parody, sequel, fan fiction, whatever it is. Good morning, Loretta. Whatever your verb is, right, about the first generation work of some choice. So I'll show you examples. It's kind of hard to explain it in this template mode, but that's the thinking I'm using here. So I'm not going to stand here and read the whole assignment description. You can read it yourself. Let me maybe show you a couple examples of things. I will say, I can describe one example and then I can show you another one. I can describe one because I can't remember. I'm not sure if I can find it anymore, but it was a work I really liked from the last time I taught this class. A student made a twine game, basically making fun of Zork, and it was very funny. So that's the kind of thing you can do. That if you want to make fun of Zork, that's the kind of thing that you could do in a third generation genre, and that would be pretty good. Not just Zork necessarily. I mean, Zork is just an example. Here's another example. This is a Twitter bot, and so that means because it's a Twitter bot, that kind of automatically makes it a third generation work, but the content of this Twitter bot is actually a first generation work. So if you remember, I actually talked about Twitter bots as an example of combinatory poetics, which is a first gen, really predominantly first gen genre, but Twitter bots find a way to do it as well. This is a Twitter bot that does that very literally because it takes the content of a first gen poetry generator called House of Dust by Allison Knowles, and this is Hugo VK who created this one. He actually used my SS bots tool that I made to create this Twitter bot, and it has the content of each tweet is a stanza of A House of Dust, and this is a transformation of that original work because it's the same words but presented in a pretty different way. And the main difference, I think, is that it is distributed via Twitter, and so each tweet comes through one stanza at a time. That's very different, right? So if you remember how I showed it to you before, this thing, right? So this is my implementation of it, and we also looked at Nick Montfort's, where you just kind of read it for as long as you feel like, and it just becomes a continuous scroll of these images as you kind of think about what a house of roots in a hot climate using electricity and how it did by children and old people, what would that look like? What would it be like to live there? Who are those people? You know, you can kind of imagine these things, but you kind of read it as a stream of continuous poetry. And the term for that kind of paper, by the way, that it's printing on is continuous paper. And when Allison Knowles reads this, she also just kind of, she pulls it out and she just kind of reads for however long she feels like. So there's not so it's a kind of a stream sense to it. Whereas when you see it in Twitter, it's shared in like discrete chunks. So you see that chunk alongside whatever else is going on Twitter. So in your timeline or alongside this update about, I guess they got that ship unstuck. So that's great. But that's, you know, providing some context for this tweet where it says a house of brick in an overpopulated area using candles. So that's a good question, Bobby. Bobby's asking a good question about copyright. Don't worry about it. If I see something that concerns me, I will tell you to stop, I guess. So if you recall, one of the major hallmarks of third generation elit is a postmodern aesthetic where one of the key characteristics of, or examples or tropes, I guess, of postmodern aesthetics is appropriation and remix. So as such, yeah, I mean, I think even a pretty liberal understanding of copyright would be okay, or just embracing copying someone else's work. So for example, like I didn't ask Allison Knowles permission to make this implementation of it. There's actually an interesting question. I don't want to get too into the weeds with this, but there is an interesting question because, like, what does she own the copyright to? Like, of course I respect her copyright and her authorship of this, but is it the code that produces all of the possible stanzas? Is it all of the possible stanzas, or is it the finite set of stanzas in the order that they were generated on that piece of paper that she reads from when she performs the work? Like, is that the canonical one? Like, which is the canonical one that actually could be copyrighted? And that's actually debatable even in a legal sense, because one of the characteristics of a work that can be copyrighted is that it has to be in a fixed medium. So can you copyright a generated poem? I don't know. Maybe not. So it's there's a legal question there. But basically, if you have an idea, go with it. And if I see a problem, I'll let you know. One thing, though, to keep in mind, I should say, is not the copyright questions, but some of the ethical questions. Because if you're appropriating someone's work, there is a politics to that, in the sense that there's certain authors whose work is very personal or very closely related to aspects of their identity. And if we were to appropriate, remix, or make fun of that, let's say, that could be pretty insulting. And so I want to be careful about that kind of remixing or appropriation. But again, I will keep an eye out for that and let you know if I think it's an issue. But just be thoughtful about what you're appropriating and what you're making fun of. If you choose a kind of to make fun of something, you don't have to make fun of something. I think, I don't think this Twitter bot is meant as a joke. I think this is meant as an homage to Allison Knowles. So certainly homage is always okay. But critique, satire, parody, those are things that I would want to be a little careful about, just in terms of the ethics. And again, like anything, just let me know. I'd be happy to. It'd be a lot easier to talk about with specific examples if you have any particular concerns. Okay, so in terms of the actual work, so you need to make a thing. It's probably going to end up being public facing automatically if you use one of the example like genres here. You should also write an artist statement explaining why you chose that medium and why you chose that work to talk about in your work. And then for the first gen work, I want you to see if you can find an example of some kind of scholarly perspective on that first or second generation work. And there are lots of ways you can find these, right? I mean, ILMSIP is probably the best resource as far as connecting creative works to scholarly works. So if you find something there, then you can probably find scholarship about it. Sorry, this is a new entry. I'm just trying to see what this is. When was this produced? Oh, 98. Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I just saw this because intertwingling is a unusual word, and that's a Ted Nelson word. And I was kind of curious because for whatever reason I keep coming, like, you know how sometimes you hear a word or a name and you suddenly see it everywhere. But in the past 2 or 3 days, I've been seeing Ted Nelson everywhere, and so I think it's kind of funny that he keeps showing up. Interesting. That sounds... So Moon is asking about combining Shade and Lil Nas X's Montero music video. I have not seen that video, so I don't really know what that would be like, but I think that sounds great. I don't know. I mean, Lil Nas X is... I don't keep up with his music, honestly, but he's very funny on Twitter and often does these kind of remix sort of postmodern, very much like postmodern or postmodern kind of aesthetics with his work. So I think he's an interesting artist to kind of do something creative with and around. So I think that sounds like it has potential. Yeah, there it is. Thanks. Is this the one that has okay, so a minute ago, thanks for sharing. I don't want to get off track too much, but I was sharing earlier, right? I mean, if you look at the trend, like what's happening, the trending stuff, on Twitter, some satanic panic was trending earlier, and I think it's because of Lil Nas X and something about his like a line of shoes that are like Satan shoes or something. I don't know. Oh yeah, and then Old Town Road is trending. I guess he's kind of going viral for these things. I mean, he's definitely many things that he's produced, I think, could be considered electronic literature. So, really, just his whole Twitter persona, probably you could think of as a literary work. Anyway, okay, cool. So thanks, Sarah. That I see why that would be controversial, but that's pretty funny. Thanks for sharing. I'll look at that later. Not right now. Okay. Maybe that's why Old Town Road is trending. Okay. Well, this is the third generation, right? It can go all kinds of places. So Eric's mentioned putting a Pikachu in it. That sounds entertaining to me. I don't know what that would look like if you mean literally like putting like a GIF of Pikachu in the middle of an interactive fiction game, but I don't know. It sounds fine to me. But again, think about what your work does rhetorically. Like, is it critiquing or tearing something down? And Satan's extended version, like Satan has his own remix. This would be more fun. This is an example where, like, I'm glad Twitch has a purpose here, but this would be maybe more fun to hear you all explain these things in a Zoom or in person. So we'll get back to Lil Nas X later, perhaps, but let me move on with my slides. So that's that one. So if you have any questions about the project or ideas you want to run by me, definitely throw them out there. But let me move on to talk about electronic literature some more. So some definitions. So Leo Flores gives us some key words here, and I think they're really helpful. Let me back up a little bit. So Leo Flores, I don't know if you watched the video or read the article, but either way, it's the same ideas. The presentation that you saw, if you watched the video, was from a conference in 2018, where Leo put out this idea of the third generation. It's become a very influential idea within the electronic literature community. So people really kind of seem to agree with him or seem to think that he's onto something here. And Leo's also, I think he's the current, I'm trying to remember his title. It's either president or director or prime minister or something, I forget, but he's the guy, like the figurehead, I don't know, for the electronic literature organization right now. I think he's president. I don't know. Sometimes he actually watches my stream. So Leo, if you're watching, tell me what your title is. But the in any case, he's someone whose ideas people listen to, but also this is, I think, a really good idea, and it has a lot of it does a lot of good work in scholarship. And I might be able to show you what I mean by that towards the end of this. But in his article, he offers a definition of electronic literature. Now, we've talked about electronic literature a lot. We've defined it a lot. We have several different definitions, but our key one, if you'll go back to Catherine Hale's, as Leo does, is literary works that are born digital. And as someone pointed out on the perusal comments for this document, that definition that we've been using for a while is a little bit circular. Like, it sort of presumes that you already know what literature is. And, maybe we do or maybe we don't. I think it makes sense that Catherine Hales didn't define it at that point because she wanted to focus on the born digital part and kind of keep that question about what literature is off on its own, and that's an understandable thing to do. But Leo doesn't do that. He actually tells us what he thinks of as literature, which he says is a writing-centered art that engages the expressive potential of electronic and digital media. He even elaborates on that a little bit more to kind of double down on that writing-centered part of it. And let me see if I can find that because I don't remember the actual quote, but I liked it. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. I want to make sure I get it. Okay, yeah. So just after that, he says he actually gives us some things that maybe aren't electronic literature. So he talks about narrative, spoken and sign language, audio and video recordings of performances, purely visual comics, and video games are of less interest from an e-literary perspective because they are not alphabetic or not using alphabetic or even asemic writing. So asemic writing is kind of its own thing, but so this is a line in the sand, kind of like I was saying, like this is what I mean. I mean things that have writing as their key thing they do, and I think reasonable people could disagree about that. Leo's a pretty laid back guy. I don't think he's going to sort of kick someone out of the conversation if they don't have writing in their work that they're talking about. But I think he's trying to focus on certain things that do prioritize writing, and I think that's a reasonable thing to think about when we think about literature, that there's some kind of writing going on. Now, I am very interested in, as he says, purely visual comics, and I'm going to have to disagree with him, basically, because I do think that it doesn't matter if there's writing in it. I think it matters if we read it. I think maybe that's a different way to think of it. And you don't have to be totally universalist about that or nihilistic about that idea of reading. Like, you could say, like, you can read everything. Like, you could read this curtain or this cup or this table or that shed. Like, yeah, you can read these things, but there are also things that are legible in a much more literal sense. And so I'm thinking about comics that don't have dialogue or words in them. And there are quite a few examples. I like them a lot, and I think you read sequence in those comics, and you interpret narrative based on the sequence, and there's definitely composition going on when the person who creates those comics puts them together. So these are things like Jim Woodring's Frank comics, which I don't know what they mean. They're very surreal, but they definitely have meaning, and you definitely read them even though there aren't any words. I think that's definitely an example of a visual medium that if those Frank comics were in, online, or if they were digital in some way, then I think they would still be electronic literature. I think I would call them that. But anyway, those are, it's a bit of a tangent, but I think I like Leo's point here, but I sort of disagree with him, but I don't put a lot of stake in that disagreement. I don't think he does either. It's just a way that he wants to frame certain things. Okay, but the third generation, this is where we are right now. So let's make sure to define this. So we're talking about works, and this is around 2005 to the present, and the key here is that it's using established platforms with massive user bases. The rest of this is getting a bit more formal, but that's the key there, the established platforms with massive user bases. That's what makes something third gen. So it includes things like social media networks or apps or mobile and touchscreen devices and web API services, but the key thing again is that it's an established platform with a user base that already exists. And the key, another way to think about this is in terms of access. So these are things that you kind of already have access to, things that are part of the ways that you normally access and consume media. But there's a literary thing in that way that you access and consume media. That's what's different about third gen lit. It comes from and it comes across your timeline or whatever in the way that you would normally encounter anything. And it just happens to be literary, and that's why we call this a third gen kind of thing. I'll show you examples, but that's what we're talking about here. Another term I thought about that might be an interesting sort of synonym for third gen is kind of, I'm not totally satisfied with this, but I want to put it out there anyway, everyday elit. So this is just everyday here doesn't mean quotidian in the pejorative sense. It just means that it's something you might come across without being assigned it in a textbook, like something that you would know about. And this is why I created the discoveries option for the homework, which is that there are lots of people out there doing electronic literature, making electronic literature that have never heard that term and never read any of the works that we're talking about here, but they're doing something really cool. And so you might come across that on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, and I would love to hear about it. So that's why you can tell me about it and your peers about that in the Discoveries channel in Discord. You can also use the Discoveries channel to find older works, but I imagine that there's a lot of things that, now that you all know some things about electronic literature, you'll start seeing it in places that I'm not directing you to, but that you know about already, and you'll be able to share those with us in the Discoveries channel. I think that might be the most valuable kind of thing to add to that Discoveries channel, actually. And TikTok, I mean, a couple of you have been sharing some TikTok things. I don't have TikTok. I guess I could. I don't know. I don't have that much against the platform. I don't know. I heard people complain about it. I think, I don't know. I have my misgivings about it as a platform, but it's probably fine. I guess it's inherited a lot of the same kind of modes of communicating and creating as were popularized by Vine, R.I.P. Vine, but it's it's something that people are doing some pretty interesting things with, I think, and that's what I'm hoping to see if I do get into TikTok. And and Elena, share some good stuff if you see it, right? If you see literary things, and if you think about like Leo's definition of something needing to be writing centered, I've seen TikToks when they go viral or whatever, or when they become memes, but very often you have somebody talking, but then you see their words on screen with them, or they do things like point to words as they pop up, and so there's definitely writing in that interface, and that seems to fit very nicely within Leo's definition. Absolutely. And there's a lot of really creative editing I've seen, and different, I'm sure there's different plugins or apps that connect with it to do like writing kind of things. So definitely TikTok is an interesting thing. And TikTok, of course, if you are on TikTok, it feeds you things, feeds you new content, right? And so that's an example of the everydayness of elit if it comes through TikTok. Yeah, maybe I should get TikTok. I don't know, maybe not. All right, so this is a slide actually from Leo's talk, and and it's included in the article. So I just typed it up to make it easier to display here. And if I had more time, I would have made these kind of reveal each bullet point one at a time, but I didn't have time. So it's this is some back and forth. So these are meant to be parallel. So the stuff that's on this side is meant to be parallel to the stuff on that side. I can't point that far because my arm's going to get cut off. But yeah, you see what I mean. The two bullet points, they're meant to be parallel. So whereas the second generation seeks originality and formal innovation, the third generation builds upon existing forms. And where the second generation builds and adapts interfaces for works, then third generation adopts existing interfaces. So in other words, if you're in the second generation working in that modality, or it was that time period, you are usually, if you have a literary work, you're going to build the whole way people find the work. You're going to build a website for it and hope people come to your website. Or you'll share it through the blogosphere, or whatever other means existed, which were or mailing lists. The ways of getting audiences were certainly more limited back then, and that's something that characterizes the main difference with the distribution difference with the third generation. But basically, if you think of even something like 12 Blue, right? It's in a web environment, you access it in a web browser, but you still have to learn how to operate it. And even though you know what links are and you can click on them, figuring out which links to click on and what links do when you click on them, and what the links on the side mean versus the ones in the text, there's a learning process to 12 Blue, and that might be a challenge. Whereas in a third generation work, you're already familiar with the platform, so you already know what you're doing when you start up looking at a thing. Maybe easier to think about not interactive fiction or hypertext examples, but thinking of Twitter bots. For a Twitter bot, you just read it. You just follow the account and you see it in your timeline, and that's it. You already have a Twitter timeline, so it just becomes part of that thing that you're already doing. You don't have to install something special in order to look at it. Unless you never have used Twitter before, but if you do use Twitter, you follow a Twitter bot, that's already there. All right, so a big difference though, and this is where what I like about the way Leo presents this, and what I also want to riff on a bit, is the difference in the poetics of it. So it's not just that these are different distribution models, different platforms, but the kinds of things we're producing in these platforms also have a pretty important set of differences that probably are secondary or almost accidental, but I think are pretty, they go really well with these different distribution patterns as well. So modernist and experimental poetics, these are things that are difficult and that are connected to and very aware of artistic and literary traditions and references. And this kind of difficulty is, I think, a really interesting problem for electronic literature. And I think about it a lot when I teach electronic literature, because there are things like 12 Blue that I love, but I know how hard it is. Like, I know how hard it is to get into it. And I'm not lying when I say I really enjoy that kind of work, but I also recognize that for many students that are coming to this for the first time, it's just very difficult. Not just the configurative difficulty of clicking around, but just sort of like making sense of what the heck we're reading. It takes a particular kind of discipline and a particular kind of work. And he goes on, there's actually a pretty important critique that I think Leo makes in this article, where he's pointing out that tradition of difficulty in eLit is both alienating to potential new consumers of eLit, and it is also a kind of self-serving structure. And he goes on, he doesn't spend a ton of time on it, but I think it actually really is an important outcome of his conversation about the third generation, which is that there's a sense of kind of democratizing, or you could almost say decolonizing electronic literature through the possibilities of the third generation and the new audiences and new platforms and new kinds of groups of people finding access and finding ways to produce electronic literature. That's something that I hope I can explain a little bit more about later, but that's it's interesting to think about, because there's a sense that electronic literature, as we've been doing it for a while, it's very often made by and taught by the same group of people. I mean, there's a core group of people. It's a big group, but we do tend to see each other's work, and the people making eLit tend to be people like me, college professors, or not everybody obviously, but there is a lot of us that are college professors that also produce work and then also teach this work and then teach our students about each other's work. And so you see the same names over and over again. And so I think part of that has to do with this sense of that insularity is somewhat self-serving, and it can be problematic. And so there's some important conversations, I think, happening in the electronic literature community to help kind of unpack that. And I think the third generation is like a really good way into that. I think that's a way that we are hopefully finding new audiences and new creators that are producing eLit. And we are. I think we definitely are. But it's an ongoing process, and I think that is a process that I think really started with the third gen conversation. Okay, so the other thing, so aesthetically, I got off a bit there, but thinking aesthetically about the third gen, Leo talks about remix, pastiche, ready-made adaptations, fandoms. These are things that are done in a postmodern or pop cultural kind of aesthetic, and that tends to be characteristic of third generation as well, as we'll see. Okay, so here's some examples, and I will, let's see, yeah, we got 15 minutes, good. So Eliza is a chatbot, really the grandmother of all the chatbots, and it was a first generation work, we could call it, because it's 1966. So what I've got over the next series of slides is a group of, where's my emoji? Sorry, I had an emoji here, but I don't see it popping up. Why isn't it there? That's weird. You can see it here, right? Oh, I forgot to share my slides, by the way, but I'll put them in here. But the I put emoji on these slides to help tell the different examples apart, but I don't see that. Huh, weird. Oh, maybe I accidentally animated it so it won't show up until I get to the end. We'll find out. It'll be a nice surprise. So Eliza, again, we're thinking about the differences in the generations. So in the first generation, and what I'm doing over these slides is I'm looking at bots in the three generations and how they were different in those three generations. So so Eliza, it was custom software. It only did this one thing. It was written from scratch. It's not like it was something that Weizenbaum repurposed. It was just something that already existed. No, it was something that he wrote from scratch, right? And there was one of it. It was difficult to access. You had to be connected to, his time-sharing computer, or, eventually, of course, there are copies of it now, but it's not like everyone was connected to the internet in 1966. Almost no one was. So it was not like widely circulated, and really people knew about it because he wrote a paper about it and then a book, and so that's how people learned about and were able to connect to understand its importance and so on. But it was not widely available at all. So the audience, also interestingly, I think the audience was not really literary either. So Eliza was made essentially as a joke and meant to be a work of satire, basically, but it was not really produced as literature and consumed as literature. Like, it wasn't anthologized or anything like that. And I think that's an interesting characteristic. And in fact, I think that characteristics of things being made that are literary but aren't really made for a literary audience, I think you'll see a lot of that in Generation 1 and Generation 3. And so I think Generations 1 and 3 actually have a lot in common, whereas second generation works tend to have that idea of that sort of ivory tower sense of academia that I was talking about a minute ago. So Galatea by Emily Short, of course. So Galatea is, of course, the title of the work, but I'm here thinking specifically of Galatea, the character that you interact with in that work. And that's really the predominant structure of that work, but she is, in some ways, a descendant of Eliza, and so I think it makes sense to think of her in this timeline. Of course, the platform is IF-specific, interactive fiction-specific software. You all played it just on the web by clicking a link, but in 2000, you would have had to be following the interactive fiction community or be a member of that community, and you would have to have special software in order to play Galatea. I don't remember exactly which one it was programmed in, but you would need to have probably a Z machine interpreter like Gargoyle or Spatterlight, or there was lots of others, in order to play the work at all. So you'd have to have that, and that's not like impossible. It's not like super complicated, but it is non-trivial. It's something that you would have to go out of your way to do. And so if you didn't know to do that or weren't willing to, then you would not be able to access Galatea. So that there is a kind of specialization to that access. And therefore, I think there's also a specialization to the audience. It is a somewhat niche audience. The IF community, like a lot of other communities, they're practitioners and critics, and so they write for each other ultimately, or initially at least, and especially during this period of the 90s and early 2000s. And so we look at a work like Galatea, or a character like Galatea. She's really written to kind of show what's possible within a interactive bot character, and so it has that sense of, I mean, it is a difficult work. It has complexity, but it's a very rich kind of complexity, I think. But it does seem to follow Leo's pattern there. So moving ahead into the third generation, every word is a Twitter bot. I don't know if this is the best sequel, really, but it is a third generation bot, and I think really the most important third generation bot. So I think that makes sense. Maybe not the most logical continuity with Galatea, but that's okay. The platform is Twitter, right? I mean, the platform that Alison Parrish programmed it in is Python, I think, but that doesn't really matter because we don't consume it with Python. We consume it via Twitter. And so we access it by following it on Twitter, and that's it. The audience bit is a little bit more complicated because it's out there for anyone to follow and think about, but what you think about it and whether you think it's dumb or funny or brilliant is going to vary, but anyone has that opportunity to think about it because it's just out there. And many people, the diversity of people's responses to it, I think, is part of what's interesting about it. So some other examples, interactive fiction. Zork, I think, is a good example of a first-generation interactive fiction work, and this is because we're talking about interactive fiction right now. It seems like a reasonable thing to look at. Zork was a proprietary platform, and so that meant that you had to purchase the software in order to run Zork on your computer, and of course you had to have a computer in order to play it on a computer. So that right there is it's a growing audience in the early 1980s, but it's still a limited audience. And essentially, it's people who are curious about computers or have one or think they should get one or start getting computers. So certainly not everybody. But still, it's growing in the early 1980s. Photopia is we could say second generation work. Like Galatea, it is IF-specific software, probably Z machine, or I think it's actually Glulks, which is always a really awkward thing to try to say. But that's another IF platform. and it is it's freely distributed, but setup or installation is non-trivial. Like, you all just played it by clicking on a link, but initially you would have to download a specific interpreter for it and then be able to play it on your computer. Because it uses the color stuff, usually we're not able, like, I don't think you can, you might work in Gargoyle, come to think of it, but it might not actually, and that would be an interesting thing to try. But the web version works fine, so it doesn't really matter. And again, like Galatea, the audience is really people interested in IF and seeing what's possible. I think Photopia is also a good kind of ambassador for IF to help explain to people what IF is. It's pretty, I think, beginner friendly as far as IF work is concerned, but it's still definitely like, you do have to kind of go out of your way to get to it. You're probably not going to see it just within the platform of whatever social media channels you pay attention to. Okay, so, and then as a third generation example of interactive fiction, I've got Gone Home in here. I imagine some of you are familiar with Gone Home. It's a computer game, or it is presented as a computer game. You have to purchase it, install it on your computer. I think it's built in the Unity engine. And its audience is complicated, kind of like every word. I say that because it's produced and distributed. It's distributed on Steam. You can install it on your computer. I don't really have time to demo it right now, so I'm not going to. But it's a game that some people who didn't care for it called it a walking simulator, implying that there's no actual action and no real gameplay to it. And I think that's a fair critique if you think of it as a game. But if you think of it as interactive fiction, it's very similar to other interactive fiction works. It's just that you're walking around and making sense of what you see, as opposed to typing things to say go north, go south, whatever. You're actually moving using arrow keys to orient yourself in a 3D environment. So I think as interactive fiction, it's very coherent and compelling. So it's just that people weren't necessarily using that term. So that's where, but it's widely available. It's well known, and has a certain kind of notoriety because of people's differences in responding to it. But I really like it a lot. I think you should play it. Okay, so interactive fiction, this is just kind of summarizing what I was just talking about, but basically a big difference is the different ways of doing it, different styles, different genres, but ultimately distribution is relatively centralized now through itch.io and Steam in particular as ways to for people to find new work and install and play new work and experience it that way. So that's what makes that come together pretty well, I think, to characterize, again, the third generation. Okay, I forgot to fill in this whole slide, but I was trying to make a similar point about hypertext, which is whereas initially you needed bespoke custom platforms that only do hypertext stories like Storyspace or even arguably HyperCard. Then second generation, we get the web as the way to do that. And then now we often think about Twine. Twine, of course, can be distributed via the web, but often you would think of it not as a web page, but as a thing that you access through something like itch. And so it has that, again, that egalitarian sort of platform to it. So that's kind of a notes for a slide and not a complete slide. Okay, so I think there's a few fallacies that we should talk about here. I don't think I'm going to quiz you about which fallacy is which, but I think they do raise some interesting points for discussion regarding the third generation. And so I thought I would these are on the right hand, these are just my quick thumbnail versions of these fallacies. The pioneer fallacy just means that just because something was first, that does not mean it's better. The generational fallacy would say that the opposite, which is just because something's newer, it doesn't make it better. Right? I mean, I think you'll see that as you look at works, but works, just because Uncle Roger was the first hypertext does not mean that it's the best. I mean, I think it's good, but it doesn't, there might be somebody might make something better someday, right? I mean, these are things that we can still assess in their own terms, whatever generation we align them with. The viral fallacy just is the idea that something's popular doesn't necessarily mean it's better. Something that is difficult doesn't make it better, and difficulty here could be either difficulty in terms of how you read it or play it. It also could be difficulty in terms of programming. So I'll just show you a couple quick examples of that, just in my own work. Did I spell that right? Yeah. So this Twitter bot is probably the one that took the most work for me to produce, right? And it's pretty good. I'm happy with it, but it took a ton of work to put this together. Just to make it do what it does. But it has 81 followers, and so it is not super popular in the realm of things. Whereas this one, Crooked Cosmos, took a few hours, but not nearly as much work to put together, right? So Exopalettes took me weeks. Crooked Cosmos took me couple hours initially, but then I've worked on it over the years. But it's 12,500 followers. So that's that doesn't necessarily mean it's better than the other one, but I think it actually is. And the point is just that the amount of work you put into something doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one relationship with popularity or value, either one, right? So because popular isn't value, virality or popularity doesn't equal quality either. All right, so also the user fallacy, that one's like, just because something is simple does not mean it's worse. So if you've used cheatbots done quick to make a Twitter bot, but you haven't programmed one in Python, it doesn't really make a difference, right? I mean, that still could be a very good bot. It has to do with what you're creating. I wanted to make another fallacy here, and I explain another fallacy that I think is relevant as well. And I'm calling this either the historicization fallacy or maybe the teleological fallacy. But it comes up whenever we talk about history in periods and we use the word generation to talk about those periods. I think it's a very common thing to do, and it's a very convenient thing to do. And I'm not saying we should stop using the words generation, but I think there is an implication sometimes that there's a consequentialist narrative or a teleological narrative. Teleological means like we're interested in the end, getting to the end as a consequence of the beginning. And if we are thinking of these generations like this, I think we are mistaken. So I'm going to draw a line through that, which is to say that I don't think that we should understand the third generation as a result of the second generation. I think there's probably a closer relationship between the first and second generation, but especially between second and third, it's not that the second gave birth to the third or even the first giving birth to the second. I think there are quite a few people working in and producing works that are really brilliant in the third generation who really don't know a lot about the second generation or first generation works. And that's fine. I mean, I think they might enjoy it. I think it might be interesting for them, but they don't need to have that in order to produce really interesting work in a third generation. So I want to kind of decouple these a little bit from each other and maybe think of these as different moments, but I think the generational thing can lead us down a line of thinking a bit too much or paying a bit too much attention to that idea of heritage, or maybe it might lead us to insist that third generation artists or writers should know their history and go back in time and look at these things. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they might enjoy it, but I'm not gonna say someone is looking at someone like John Boyd, like he does that work in Twine, like he does, or I don't know if he does Twine or not, but when he made 17,776, I don't know if he's ever seen hypertext fiction before. Maybe he has, but I don't know if he needs to, right? I mean, it's a work that speaks for itself. And I don't know if it would be better if he had read Afternoon of Story or Uncle Roger at some point in his life. Maybe not. It is what it is. Okay, so just some contemporary examples of third gen elit, just to show you kind of what's going on. This is a tweet, and it has, I guess, gone viral, as you can see by the number of likes and so on. I wanted to take a screenshot of this and a couple others in the context of a Twitter timeline, because that's where they live, and that's what kind of helps understand them as a third generation work, right? So this is a meme this is a tweet with at least 2 references, I guess 3 if you count the Wizard of Oz, but there is, I guess, a video which might have originated on TikTok of 2 guys arguing, and then this is an image that presents that argument as though it were a poem by Rupi Kaur. And Rupi Kaur is a poet who became popular first on Instagram and then was published successfully in print. She published in print, and then those became successful as well. So, but there's a particular style that she uses, and this is kind of making fun of that style and also referencing this argument from this video and the art style of the Instagram. So many layers, and the layeredness of it is part of what I think is interesting about this from a literary perspective. This is another one. So Adam Ellis is a webcomic creator, and he's I just noticed he changed his Twitter handle. That's interesting. It used to be Moby Dickhead, and now it's Adam Totes Comics, or Adam Tots. I don't know how he means to pronounce that. But in any case, he produced a what was eventually revealed as a narrative or story, a ghost story, over a couple months or years. I forget actually how long it ran. You can see Satanic Panic was captured there in that trending title there. And it was a ghost story, like it was an internet ghost story, really a kind of Web 1.0 or second generation elit style of ghost story, which I really enjoyed when it was going live. Basically, his apartment was haunted by this ghost of a child slash demon or something, and it was like really spooky, and he had video and audio, and like it was really well done as an internet ghost story. And so but it existed on Twitter, and like anything else on Twitter, there's this kind of suspension of disbelief about other people, especially people with blue check marks, and you kind of learn to listen to them. And why doesn't he have a blue check mark? He probably should. Does he not? Sorry, I'll look into this later. But anyway, yeah, another example of third gen elit. Another one here, Shelley Jackson's Snow. I've shared this a couple times before. I think Shelley Jackson, of course, was a important author of second generation elit in producing Patchwork Girl and My Body of Wonderhammer and several other things. But this is ongoing, and it's using Instagram, so we don't have to do anything special in order to access it. It's just there. And this is just an example on Facebook, a group where we pretend to be ants. It's a kind of collective fiction. Like those of us who are members of the group contribute to the fiction by pretending to be ants and doing ant things and talking about ant things on this Facebook group. And that's it. Okay, so I think there are some big questions here, which obviously we don't have time to unpack right now. But one of the things I want us to think about is that sense of power and structure related to the second generation especially. There's a really important critique going on there and I know I'm a little over time, so if you need to go, that's fine. But I want to see if I can find it. There's I think a really compelling and actually kind of damning quote, not damning, but my comment was oof. A quote from Matthew Kirschenbaum, who's a scholar of this kind of thing. And wait, that's not the right comment. Come on, Provisal, help me out here. That's not the one I just clicked on. I clicked on this one. Okay, there it is. Talking about difficulty and the way that works that are produced in the second generation in particular tend to have difficulty, and as he says, difficulty, seriousness, and conceptual density. These are all characteristics that have served to gain elit a firm institutional purchase in academia, where difficulty and seriousness are rewarded. And academia helps circulate elit through courses, criticisms, publications, exhibitions, digital repositories, and more, even as it has struggled to directly monetize such circulation. So I think this is a great point, right? I mean, it's a point about the insularity of the community, and also the way that insularity has sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm interested to think about how we might use the third generation or look to the third generation as a way to help break us out of that. So, and also to disrupt kind of some of the power structures, honestly, because academia is a very kind of, the ivory tower is a thing. I mean, not literally, but conceptually a thing that describes the ways that those of us in the academy tend to kind of enjoy and reinforce our privilege as scholars, but also as practitioners. And so I think it's really important that we look for and find new voices. And I think that's what the third generation makes super relevant and possible. So anyway, I'm really excited to see where that goes. There's been an interesting conversation and some movement within the elit community just in the past few weeks around some of these questions. So I might be able to talk a bit about that some other time, because I'm out of time for today. So thanks for watching. If you're still watching, I'll switch to the bird cam for a few more minutes in case you care. But in case anything shows up, I don't know if anything's going to show up with my kids screaming in the backyard. Maybe that's unlikely, but who knows? Maybe they'll be there. Either way, I'll wrap it up, and I'll see you all, some of you in person on Wednesday and some of you online on Wednesday, everybody online on Friday. Remember, check out Black Mirror, Bandersnatch, and try to get to the end so we can talk about it on Wednesday. Okay, well, with that, I will wrap things up, and I will see you all later. Have a good day.